I thought I would make some beef and ricotta meatballs with you. This was actually a recipe that one of my colleagues cooked for me long ago. She probably can't remember it, but I remember every meal, especially all the nice ones. So anyway, this is an ottolenghi recipe in actual fact, or a take on ottolenghi's recipe. I can't claim complete praise for it all, but the beef and the ricotta works really nicely together. The ricotta kind of softens the meatballs slightly. From a cost perspective, it's also more cost effective, and it's just delicious. Anyway, so without further ado, we will get started. I haven't done any prep except for peeling my onions. I thought once again, like another video the other day, I will show you once more how I chop my onions, sorry. So taking the onion, I cut it in half, but I've left this rooted part attached. I'm going to cut all the way down. Sorry, I appreciate we could probably do with an overhead shot here, but I'm being lazy. So all the way down this way. Can you see I've cut all the way down to here, down to this rooted part. And then when you turn it around the other way, that end that you haven't sliced through will keep it all together. So I am going to cut 3 onions, finely diced. And you do want them fairly finely diced, so feel free to use a mini chopper if you want to, or a food processor. If your dice is too big and chunky, then you'll find it affects how your meatballs kind of bind together, how they stick together. You'll get big chunks of onion falling out, and your balls will be less kind of compact. So anyway, I will cut through these. Okay, so those onions are all cut. You'll see I've used a mixture of red and white, or red and brown. That's just because that's all I've got left. We're towards the end of our week. Food shop's coming tonight, so I'm just using up what I have, and that's totally fine. Next of all, I've got quite fat cloves of garlic. If yours are a bit skinnier, you can use more, but I'm going to use 4 fat cloves of garlic, so use 6 if they're tiny little ones. Again, I showed you this the other day. I just use this hard bit of my hand here and just press down until you hear it kind of split, and then your peel should just pretty much fall off like that. You could also use a knife, just use the flat edge of your knife, or whack it with a rolling pin, or you might have a garlic crusher that you can put the whole thing in which case use that. Whew, those onions are strong. So I'm going to peel these. Okay, so now I'm going to grate those garlic cloves, just because I need the grater anyway to grate parmesan later, so it just saves getting another thing dirty. Okay, so now I'm going to heat my pan. I am going to use 1 pan for this whole dish. You could split it and do your sauce in 1 pan and your meatballs in another, or at least start it off that way. Again, I just like to minimise the amount of washing up. So I am going to stick with 1 pan. I've put that on a high heat, and it's fairly instant because it's induction. So I'm going to give a good splash of olive oil. Probably about 3 tablespoons in there. And then I'm going to start with frying the onions. I'll add the garlic a little bit later. Okay, so I'm going to leave those in the pan now for about 5 minutes just to soften. I'm going to pop a lid on, because that will just help create some steam in there and help them sweat down a little bit more efficiently. In the meantime, whilst those are sweating, I am going to crack on with making my meatballs. So I happen to have some parsley in the fridge. If you had oregano, that would be a good shout as well. I'm going to just bunch this up and cut about a good handful. Again, fairly finely chopped. Okay, so yeah, that's a good, fairly man-sized handful. I'm just going to run my knife through it a little bit more just to make it really fine. I will happily do a video on handy knife skills if that would be useful. If anybody fancies that, just comment and I will make moves to make that happen. Not so that you can become some master butcher or fishmonger, and neither am I, but just the basics. Right, so that's a good handful. I'm going to pop that into a bowl. I'm just going to turn my onions down. Right, so into there, I don't have any fresh oregano, so I'm just going to use a teaspoon of dried oregano. You can use an actual spoon or about a third of the lid. A pot of ricotta, so this is 250 grams, give or take 50 grams. If it's 300 grams, chuck it in, that's fine. So that's going to go in there. I am going to add, I'm sorry to my butcher, because normally I always buy my meat from the butcher, but this is organic grass-fed beef, and I try and buy either meat from the butcher or at least organic, good quality meat. So I've got this mince, and that was, I don't know if it's 400 or 500, 400 grams. So 400 grams beef mince. You could use pork, you could use turkey, you could use veal, totally up to you. Also into there, I'm going to add an egg. That's going to help bind it all together. And then about 100 grams of breadcrumbs. And you can see, I just put these through the processor quite a long time ago. These have been in my freezer. So if ever I've got, be it leftover French stick, sandwich bread, just sliced bread, or the crusts of bread, you know, the ends, then I will, not always, I'm not that good, but I will try and blitz them up and make breadcrumbs with them. Because also the children love a schnitzel or anything breaded, so they're useful for that. And also to top things like, I don't know, cauliflower cheese, pasta bakes, just to make that cheesy top a little bit more crunchy. So that's about 100 grams in there, or again, 3 good sized handfuls. You really you don't need to be too worried about measuring super precisely. And then, if I can get the spoon out, I'm going to do a good teaspoon, actually no, I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of salt, which sounds like a lot, and if you're using kind of free running kind of fine salt, then just use 1 teaspoon. But I've got fairly flaky, well, Malden salt there, so it's not, it sounds daft, but it's not as salty salt, if that makes sense. And then I'm also going to add a really good grind of pepper, so about half a teaspoon of pepper. I think I said the other day in one of my videos, I would always freshly grind it, unless I'm making Asian dishes with white pepper, which is totally different. I would always grind black pepper like this, freshly, rather than buying the freshly ground black pepper in inverted commas, which is a bit more peppery and strong. It's not as nice. Certainly not as child friendly. Okay, so pop that in there. And then I'm going to speed this up a bit, but I am going to add 60 grams or a couple of generous sized handfuls of grated Parmesan. If you've got ready grated, chuck it in, but not the fake stuff. Don't use the fake stuff because it's just not as nice. Okay, so let's do this. Okay, I want to leave enough for dinner later to sprinkle. So, Parmesan cheese is in there. Now I'm just going to grab a spoon and stir these. I'm going to the heat back up again. So they're really nice and soft, and again, you just want to take that kind of raw edge off, because some of those onions will form part of the meatballs. You don't want them to taste raw, or the onions to taste raw, or too harsh. I've just popped into there the garlic. I'm going to give that, not long, but just a minute or so in there, and then we will remove those onions and garlic from that pan, just for the moment. Okay, so I'm going to remove those into a bowl or onto a plate, whatever. Because I want to use this pan to fry off the meatballs, and then we can make the sauce in and around the meatballs, if that makes sense. You could fry off your meatballs in a completely different pan and keep this pan going with your tomato sauce and then combine them. Especially if you're in a hurry, but I'm in no mad hurry. So we will use that pan in a minute, but for the time being I'll just switch it off. So with this onion and garlic, I'm going to take half of it and stick it in there with my meatballs, just to give that, just to add some flavour into the meatball mixture. Just be careful if you're sticking your hands straight in, obviously it'll be hot. If you wanted to make your meatballs but not fry them or cook them until later, or freeze them even in their uncooked state, then of course just make sure that your onions and garlic are cold before you add them to the meat mixture. So you could at this stage stick this mixture into I wouldn't do a food processor because you want to keep the mixture a little bit loose, but you could by all means pop it into like a stand mixer, like a KitchenAid. Now you can go at it with your hands or with a spoon. I would start it off with a spoon, and then to be honest, I am a fan of just getting in there with your hands, because I think it's so much more effective. And then you can really, can you see, I'm almost squishing it through my fingers. If this bothers you, you could wear some latex gloves or just keep going with a spoon. It's a really easy mixture to mix. Now, if you were not confident with your seasoning, because there's nothing worse than under-seasoned meatballs, I would just take a little bit and either oven bake it or fry it in your pan so you can taste it. And I will always do that with stuffing. But I am quite confident that this, I've made them so many times, that this will be good. So I am going to just take, actually I'm going to stick my pan back on right now. So same pan, I'm not going to bother washing it. If yours is particularly sticky, by all means wash it. But I'm just going to stick a little bit more olive oil in there. And then it's up to you how big you make your balls. I'm making mine about golf ball size. But it really is completely up to you. If you could always roll them all and then transfer them into the pan. I'm just going to keep the pan on a medium heat and stick them straight in there. Now my pan, it's fairly new anyway, which helps, but it is fairly non-stick. The only thing I would say is if you don't have a non-stick pan, really heat it up well so it becomes a bit more non-stick. and then add your oil in and your meatballs. Or you could, if you wanted to, you could even pop your meatballs onto an oven tray and grill them all over. Brown them off that way. And that's all I'm doing. I'm not cooking them through, you just want to brown them off. So now I'm going to keep these cooking for probably 10 minutes. I'll give them about 2 to 3 minutes on each side, and I say that, I know they're spherical, but if you imagine they've got 6 sides, a bit like a dice, give them, a couple of minutes each side. So I will press pause, but I'll see you again in 10 minutes. Okay, so these have had a good 10-12 minutes. I've treated them a bit like a dice shape and tried to fry on as much of the surface area as I can. But just to show you up close, they're fairly brown all over, but it really doesn't matter. It just gives the whole dish a bit more flavour, but also helps your meatballs to be a little bit more robust when we chuck the sauce ingredients in there. So, don't worry about the sticky bits in the bottom of the pan. That will help you in terms of flavour for your sauce. So straight into here, I am going to add the onions and the garlic that we reserved earlier. I am going to add in a good couple of tablespoons of tomato puree, and just find a kind of bare patch in the pan that's not got a meatball in the way, and try and squeeze it into there. And just give it a little mush on the bottom of the pan, just to cook it out ever so slightly. But to be honest, it doesn't matter. We're going to leave this to simmer for half an hour, as long as you need to, basically. So I will ignore this, simmer it for a bit, go out on the school run, come back, and then I'll turn it on again later. So into there then, I'm going to, my poor husband, I drink white and he drinks red, so I'm using the tail end of a bottle of his wine. I'm sure he'll be delighted. And then a tin of chopped tomatoes, or you could use 400 or 500 mils of passata if you wanted to. Throw that in. Then I'm just going to rinse that tin out with a bit of water. Just give that a swill. Add that. And then we want to add, so that was about 100 mils in there. We'll add another 500 millilitres of, I use chicken stock because I think that's quite nice, it's inoffensive in the tomato sauce. So excuse me, I'm just going to fill that up. And I use 2 stock cubes, which I know technically, I think on the packet would say it makes up to 800 mils of stock. But obviously you've got a lot of other things going on in that pan. So you've got the tomatoes. Those 2 stock cubes really won't overpower the dish. You could even use 3, but definitely use 2. You could use vegetable stock cubes if you preferred. So, add that in. A grind of pepper, because we put pepper in the meatballs, but we haven't put anything in the sauce. And then, because I had some, I'm going to add a little bit of torn basil. I'm literally just going to almost screw the leaves off the stems and kind of twist, break it up a bit, and throw that in. You don't have to use basil, you can just use a shake of oregano, or you could use both if you wanted to. And that then that's the dish. So I am going to pop the lid on, let it simmer for kind of 15-20 minutes. And then when you remove the lid, if it's still quite saucy, still too wet basically, just crank the heat up a little bit and reduce that sauce down a tiny bit. I can do that with you later, so you know what I mean, if my dish needs to be reduced down. But actually, to be honest, depending on what you're serving it with, if you're serving it over pasta, you want the sauce to be fairly saucy. I like to serve this kind of on its own, but with orecchietti on the side, so buttered orecchietti, and then I'll do some greens to go with it. In which case, I quite like it, so the sauce is more like a thick coating. But again, I will show you what I mean later. So for now, you're done. You could pop those in the oven if you really wanted to ignore them, or if you're around, leave them on your hob simmering away, and they'll be perfectly fine. But I would pop a lid on. I'm going to pop my lid on. And I will see you later.
Okay, so this has really thickened up nicely. To begin with, I simmered it for about half an hour, at which point it was still a little bit too wet for me. So I removed the lid, turned the heat up, and really kept a close eye on it. And you can see you've got that lovely kind of thick, glossy sauce. That's it. After all the orecchietti chat, I'd actually run out, so I boiled up some penne pasta instead, threw in some broccoli towards the end of cooking, and then tossed it all together with some butter and parmesan. It was delicious. I also had leftovers to freeze for another day, which is, in my book, a total win. Don't forget to follow us for more recipes, tips, and inspiration.